Hello and welcome to another edition of iGaming Next Weekly News Live. Joining me today is Mr. Ryan Butler.
Hey, Jake, happy to be on.
Yep, good man, Ryan. As we know, we're not allowed to say Happy New Year anymore. Those are Connor's rules. He's trying to enforce Larry David standards on the rest of the world. So what I will say is this is your first pod of 2023, Ryan. You excited to be here?
Always. I was excited last year. I'm even more excited this year.
Great to hear. Hopefully, our viewers are excited as well. And just before we continue, I'd like to say thank you to our sponsors, Playson, and also to Zimpler. Ryan, seems like a hell of a lot has happened this week. Actually, this year, to be fair. And it also feels like about 90% of our news has either come kind of directly out of the US, or at least has kind of major knock-on effects for the US market. You've been writing most of it. How's it going?
A lot of it. This is, not surprisingly, Jake, it's been a really frenetic time for the last 5 years since the Supreme Court overturned
Yeah.
the online or the sports betting ban federally. We've been kind of hectic as always, but yeah, it's continued into 2023, and that's not shocking. A lot of ways, again, because it has just been so busy. There's so much attention to the U.S. market. Obviously, there are 330 plus million people here. We are part of the future. A lot of the European established international brands are looking at us, but also we are beginning legislative session. I know we want to talk a little bit about that as well and what to look for this year. But in America, most of the 50 states, their legislatures only meet for about 3 to 6 months, and typically those begin in January. So we're also gearing up. There's a lot of attention renewed on that. Maybe some more states that might legalize it again for our European audience. The U.S. really does act like 50 different countries, especially when it comes to gaming legislation. There is no rhyme or reason. And what happens in one state doesn't necessarily happen in another. Even if they shouldn't, let's say, legalize sports betting or legalize online casino, it is very different how states go about doing it. So I think all that attention kind of helps explain why we've had just such a frenetic start to 2023.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that overview, Ryan. And sorry to our audience if you heard any technical difficulties there. We'll try and get those connection or sound issues sorted out as soon as we can. Do stay with us. So yeah, like Ryan said, plenty to talk about, and I think our key topics should be ticking along the bottom so you can see what we've got in line for discussion today. But there's only one place to start in my mind, and that's with New York. And obviously, New York is a big deal for many reasons. Not least because it's the biggest US state to have actually legalized online sports betting so far. But this December, we also saw it close an entire year's of operation, which has led to some really interesting financial data. Ryan, do you want to try your audio again, and we'll see if you can give us a bit of an overview of those New York numbers?
Yeah, guys, sorry for any audio issues here. There's always an adventure, new year, and we're still having a lot of the same audio issues with it. So New York has, again, capped off just an incredible 2022. Looking back at it, it's not necessarily surprising. New York is the most populated state in the U.S. to legalize online sports betting, but even these numbers are exceeding expectations. One of the biggest things, and maybe the most surprising, is the tax revenue and just the pure numbers that it generated. Now, this is kind of could almost be its own topic of conversation, Jake, about how we look at taxation in the U.S. and everything with it. But New York has had one of the harshest, maybe that's the wrong term, but the steepest tax rates in the U.S. of any competitive market, 51% gross gaming revenue without promo deductions, two huge things. The U.S. average is around 10%, and most states have some sort of promo deduction. So New York, you cannot deduct those free bets that we've seen. Caesars had a $3,000 free bet at one point. Pretty crazy with that. You cannot deduct those winnings, even though in most other states you can. So anyway, that generated over $600 million in tax revenue, which is a huge deal, and that no other state had really even come close to that. Now, again, in New York, that is just a small fraction of their budget. They spend $200 billion, again, $200 billion over a year. So 680 million was around the final total. So it's
budget dust, they call that.
So it's, as they call it, a rounding error and all that. But it's $680 million they otherwise would not have had. So that's a kind of a victory in itself. Now, the operators, all 9 of them that are in New York, have complained very loudly about this tax rate. They want lawmakers to get it changed. They want it lowered, obviously. Highly unlikely that happens just because politicians do not like having less money. So we'll see with that. The big question, and again, I know we were talking about New York numbers looking backwards, just worth noting looking forwards, the reason why these sports books are willing to take these huge taxes, they're not making very much money in New York, despite the huge numbers. New York, again, $16 billion in handle, which is pretty incredible. Over $600 million, $660 million in gross gaming revenue for the operators. Excuse me, that's a net gaming revenue. That's after the taxes and all that. Split 9 ways. It's not a huge lot of money, but again, the big reason why they're willing to put up with this is the hopes that online casino will be coming to New York. It is live and legal in neighboring Pennsylvania. It's live in nearby New Jersey, which it splits a metro area with New York and all that. So there is some hope from stakeholders, from the companies themselves, that online casino gaming will be legalized, and that is why they're willing to put up with really kind of either losses or low profits for sports betting, because online casino is so much more lucrative. Now, we can maybe talk about that later or go on with it. Is that going to happen? That's a more uphill battle. It's politically much more difficult to get online casino gaming. There are only 7 states with some form, only really 5 that have competitive markets of online casino gaming, compared to more than 35 with some sort of sports betting. So anyway, that's just the biggest takeaways from New York when we look at it. Biggest market by far, as we expected. It's probably exceeded expectations. I mean, $1.6 billion in handle last month alone. And then the taxes, the former governor and then current governor, both expected around $500 million to generate around $680 million in taxes, is pretty incredible.
Yeah, exactly. And the little infographic we flashed up there for you obviously showed what Ryan has been saying, in so much as December was a record month, excuse me, for betting handle in the state. And if we break that down by operator, New York is kind of a nice microcosm for the wider US market, and we can see here that FanDuel recorded more than $6 billion in overall handle from New York during 2022, significantly ahead of DraftKings in second place. You'd probably say GGR is a kind of stronger barometer of a performance for operators, or perhaps not in a market that's only been going for 12 months or so. But FanDuel was the runaway leader there as well, with around 650 million in annual GGR. And that was again followed by DraftKings, nearly 50% lower there, with 350 million. That probably doesn't surprise you, Ryan?
The extent that FanDuel has succeeded is it's its own topic of conversation, not just in New York but nationally. It's really incredible, that story, and it's almost something we don't talk about enough. How so in the U.S., FanDuel and DraftKings came onto the scene at the same time. They were roughly interchangeable, and for daily fantasy players, I think in a lot of ways they are still. They're very similar. They kind of are 1-2. They come with it, and for FanDuel to be so dominant, particularly in GGR. Now, again, there's no perfect metric for measuring the impact of a sports book. I kind of like using handle just because it's a big number and people like to see that. It's not the best indicator. Gross gaming revenue is probably a little bit better to look at that. But the fact that they have done so well, not just in New York but nationally, is really incredible. A lot of that it's got to be credit to Flutter, Paddy Power Betfair, which bought them pretty quickly, right around so that was summer 2018, just about a month or 2 after the Supreme Court decision. That was a huge boost with it. DraftKings, a different approach. They went SPAC, they went publicly traded, merged with SB Tech, so they've stayed very in-house. But I think having that has really helped it. But it's still, bettors are looking at brand names and all that. Most of the discerning, there's not a whole lot of really discerning bettors. There's not a whole lot of bettors that are really line shopping that much. They're betting on something they're familiar with, maybe a promo or whatever with it. And again, that FanDuel and DraftKings come onto the scene, have roughly the same breadth or understanding or recognition in the U.S., and have FanDuel be so much more ahead. Again, it's just really impressive. But the gross gaming revenue part of that is also explained the proliferation of single game parlays, which is one of the major stories of 2022. It's such a big deal. Those are higher profit margins. FanDuel has really, really excelled at that. DraftKings has jumped on too as well with it. But it's just really interesting to see how well and how quickly FanDuel has been able to monetize itself. Again, starting off from that same kind of baseline as everybody else.
Yeah, and the graphic on screen now kind of I don't think you can see the operators there with the streaming bar along the bottom, but FanDuel is the company in green, and that shows you their market share domination. And thanks for that graphic, Elizabeth. Ryan, obviously, one thing you really are getting stuck into this January and also the back end of last year is different state developments and where they are in their timelines in regulating gaming and launching online sports betting. And if we look at Maryland, I know you've written a story about this recently. There's a similar picture there as well, with FanDuel kind of once again, dominating in terms of handle for the first full month of regulated online sports betting in Maryland, which, correct me if I'm wrong, I think went live in November of last year.
Yeah, and Maryland is the most recent state to go live where we have numbers for it. Ohio went live in January. We'll have their numbers hopefully next month. But Maryland, yes, like you said, went live in November, right before our Thanksgiving holiday. We got the full picture of December numbers just came out. And yeah, that is another big takeaway. FanDuel has continued similar dominance. It's about close to 50% market share against 6 other competitors, including DraftKings, Caesars, BetMGM, Barstool, PointsBet, BetRivers, which are really your top 7 operators by handle. It's really impressive to see just how dominant FanDuel's market share remains in Maryland. So it's continuing that trend with it. Maryland, solid right under $500 million in handle in December, probably around where we thought they would be. This has been a long anticipated market. They technically, voters approved Maryland sports betting technically in 2020. It took until November 2022 for online sports betting to go live. So a very long, frustrating thing. You can check out iGaming Next for all the drama that went on with that one. But yeah, Maryland going on with it. It just shows that FanDuel and basically nearly every market in the U.S. it is putting up not just leading, but it is dominating. Just to see a 50% handle market share is just in a 7 operator market again against the industry leaders is just really incredible. And just interesting too that as we see it, we're going to talk some more about other sports books and some developments in 2023. FanDuel is getting close to 40 to 50% market share by itself. Then you add in DraftKings, Caesars, and BetMGM, which are again getting between them another 40%. So we're leaving 10 to 20% at best market share left for everybody else in the nation. So it's pretty incredible. It's an interesting thing to look at is how are these new operators that want to jump in? How are they planning to do that when you have really, you have one company that is so far ahead. Then you have, then you have a second, which is kind of there, and 4 that really dominate. So that's something else we'll be watching too, and we'll see it kind of play out in Maryland already.
Yeah, exactly. And a few minutes ago, Ryan, you made the point that betting operators were kind of relatively not happy, but they were going to swallow this tax rate for the time being in the hope that online casino will eventually be legalized in New York. But our dear friend Nico Janssen flagged a story with us this week that showed kind of how land-based gambling and casinos could be developing in New York, especially in downstate New York, with some land-based establishments potentially coming sooner than we imagined. So according to a story from Inside Asia Gaming this week, Genting Malaysia and MGM Resorts are kind of in the hot seat for one of those licenses, which is looking to cost around $500 million at a minimum, compared to obviously, $100 million for an online sports betting license. On the topic of tax, it looks like slot machines will be taxed at about a minimum of 25%, with table games taxed at closer to 10%. But yeah, that would be incredibly lucrative for any of those companies that happen to be successful with one of those licenses, you'd imagine.
I'll also say, Jake, it looks like the license it's going to be closer to $1 billion. These numbers are going to be astronomical. So we saw reports on Thursday morning U.S. time again. Las Vegas Sands has thrown their hat into the ring. Caesars has already made a very high-profile pitch in Times Square for a casino. Every company, unlike it's very interesting. Chicago, which is America's third largest metro area, second most dense. It's Los Angeles is a little bit more spread out.
Yeah.
Chicago casino was really kind of a lot of the major players had no interest whatsoever in the market. New York is the opposite. Every single company in the U.S. has expressed anybody who's anybody has expressed an interest in New York, and now we're starting to see some of these bigger companies trickle in. Again, Las Vegas Sands, Caesars, MGM, which is a little bit different. You mentioned them. I should explain to everybody with it too. This is an important note because the Chicago casino is going to be, we've never had anything quite like this. New York casino, the New York casino with the largest metro area in the US by far. This is a big deal. This is why everybody is willing to pay these insane taxes for a brick and mortar casino. But MGM has a sort of quasi casino racetrack sort of thing in the New York City metro area. This would allow it to have your full fledged, what we call Las Vegas style gambling. And then, yes, there's a Resorts World, Resorts World Casino that's also in the general New York vicinity. Same deal. They have electronic games, so no dealers for their table games. It's just a limited casino option. So anyway, these would be allowed. Those two likely will win 2 of the 3 slots. So really, because they're already basically there, they have good locations. The third one is really the big one, and that's where everybody is trying to jump in. And we've seen some just crazy proposals. One in, again, Times Square, which is the heart of Manhattan, the heart of New York City. Then today we saw something near in Queens. There's been some proposals out there. There's a little bit more land, though it's a little further, but still very dense. So it's just gonna be a fascinating thing to watch. This casino will be unlike any other in the U.S. because we've never had something in this urban area. Chicago was the first one. And it was a little bit different. It was just hard to get that one done. New York, everybody is throwing money at this to see what's going to happen with the brick and mortar casino in the immediate New York City city limits or the immediate vicinity.
Yeah, interesting. I didn't know that about the kind of difference in attitude between the Chicago casino and New York. Do you think that's probably to do with not only kind of disposable income, I guess, but also tourism, or were
Part of
there
it,
other factors for
it's just also Chicago is notoriously difficult to deal with their
that? Right.
regulations and everything with it. The cost benefit. New York is, Chicago is huge, but New York is significantly larger in the immediate metro area.
Yeah.
With it, so that's why, and it's just a little bit easier to. It's not easy to play ball in New York ever. With their politicians also notoriously difficult, but Chicago is just. For a lot of people, that the juice was not worth the squeeze, to use an expression here with it. But again, Chicago, that was a problem. New York, not at all. Everybody's wants in.
Yep. No, I get that completely. So yeah, as we've discussed, FanDuel is the runaway market leader in the US, but a few people have been tipping Bet365, the European giant, to finally make some big moves in the US in 2023, and that could really throw the cat amongst the pigeons, to use a phrase here as well. So I think early indications this year do actually support that a little bit. We saw that they gained market access in Pennsylvania via an agreement with Churchill Downs Incorporated, who of course are one of those companies that has actually pulled out of online sports betting due to it being too expensive.
Yeah, Bet365 is one of just a handful of companies on earth that I think could jump into that top 4, or maybe a top 5, or really make another sizable market share. Bet365, for the American audience, which is not familiar with it at all, Bet365 is lauded is just the best tech platform, the best offerings. It's just it's very highly respected in the industry. It's a very well financed company. It is privately held, so it doesn't have the same public requirements as everybody else with it, and it just really celebrated for its tech and everything else with it. The difference is that Americans don't know what it is. So it has the product, it has the money. Now, how does it jump in? It's interesting that there's been a lot of rumors that maybe they look to acquire a U.S. brand. We saw this with Caesars and William Hill. Caesars is William Hill. They took it and put it under. Americans did not know what William Hill was. They do know what Caesars is. So they did that rebranding. Much smaller, but 888, again, big in Europe, not big in the U.S. They took the Sports Illustrated name. So trying to do with that. Now, Bet365, do they try to kind of shoehorn themselves into the U.S.? I think part of, again, DraftKings and FanDuel's success is that brand recognition. And that everyone, in the US, every sports bettor is familiar with it, has a DFS account or has played it once or twice or is familiar with it. So Bet365, they have to then overcome that challenge of brand recognition. Nobody knows who they are. They have to challenge that they're coming in late to the party. But again, they have the assets to be able to do something if they want to. I'm still curious. It's interesting now, as you said, they are now gobbling up some licenses. They are steadily launching. They went live in Ohio this is the
Yep.
first on January 1st. This is the first state where they went live the same time as everybody else. The other states they've been live in, which are New Jersey and Colorado, they came into the party much, much later, were just afterthoughts in the overall handle. Ohio here, they come in on a mutual playing field. They have a partnership with the Cleveland Guardians, which are a Major League Baseball team in the U.S. So that kind of is a boost. They've been advertising a lot more heavily in Ohio than they have in some other states. So do they jump in with it? It'd be interesting to see there too. I think part of it is, do they do commercials? It was a big deal in America because everywhere you turn, you saw DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM, Caesars commercials every single time you turned on an ad. But it's still, TV advertising is a huge deal. Does Bet365 willing to commit its financial resources to advertising, especially with a name that, again, Americans are not familiar with? It's going to be, I think it's going to be one of the biggest stories of this year. And it's already, we're seeing they are going to they're gearing up. Pennsylvania is a big market. They're going with it. They tried to get into New York. They did not. There might be a future in which they change the law, allow more sports betting licenses, but Ohio, they're jumping in. Massachusetts is going to be a really important market in the U.S., set to launch in March. They are jumping into that one. It's going to be, again, the big story. Too early to tell, but again, for Americans, if you have not followed the Bet365 story, please do, because they are one of the few companies that I think could really make some noise.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I don't think they will do a kind of co-branded marketing partnership with a Sports Illustrated or somebody. I think they'll kind of hope that their product can win them market share kind of as the market matures. But yeah, so our friends at Eilers and Krychek think Bet365 could be live in as many as 10 states by the end of the year. And if this kind of early momentum is anything to go by, then they can definitely achieve that. And one other story we wrote this week showed that the company is undergoing a bit of a recruitment drive in the US to try and achieve that as well. So they've hired another 3 key hires in their New Jersey office, and that includes a business development manager for North America, who presumably will be responsible for exactly that, kind of leading their state by state expansion. Yeah, really interesting. One big company to keep an eye on, like Ryan says. So we've discussed, obviously, FanDuel, part of Flutter, and Bet365. Now I think we should pivot to a company at a very different stage in its life cycle. You probably know where I'm going with this, Ryan. That is Betr, which is obviously the US micro betting kind of specialists, fronted by Joey Levy, and of course Jake Paul. Now, these two presented their business plan to regulators in Massachusetts on Tuesday, and I think you were tuning into that. So, how did it go?
It went pretty well. They got this ambiguous kind of sounding. They were credentialed to qualify or whatever. There's an official vote later this month, but the Massachusetts regulators seem to approve of them and everything with it. Massachusetts has been. I've watched these hearings in more than 20 states. Massachusetts has been the most rigorous of any state I've seen. They are grilling everyone on everything, and then Betr is under extra scrutiny because it's never really started. It launched in Ohio January 1st, but it is just now starting to take deposits, just now offering real money wagering. So they are brand new. So there's questions about that. And then Jake Paul got a lot of questions too about what he's done, his antics. Obviously, a notorious YouTuber, to put it in one term, a lot with it. It's different run-ins and publicities and all this different stuff with it. So they grilled him really tightly on everything with it. But after hours and hours and hours of going through every seeming like parking ticket that anyone affiliated with the company had ever had, they did seem that they would be going to qualify for it. This Betr is not going to be some fly-by-night company. They do. Joey Levy is Simple Bet founder and has really been a big part of this micro betting revolution of these, already, Jake, in the US, where the companies are looking ahead past money line, spread, totals. Those are out. It's all these player prop bets that are part of similarly in parlays. It's all this live. It's all the little tiny bets is really where they want to jump in. Not spoiler, but it's because those have higher margins. They can charge larger VIGs or larger juice on those. For
Exactly.
your spreads, your totals, every company is the same roughly. Now there's going to be in football, one's going to be 10 points, one's going to be 9.5, which is a big deal, but still relatively people aren't looking at them. But when you have these prop bets that people are interested in, is this player going to run for 100 yards today? Is this quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, going to throw for this many yards and all that? People love those bets in the US, and they love stacking those together into these exotic, crazy, as you call accumulators or parlays here with it, where it's 1,000 to 1 odds, but on these 10 things happening, that people love them. They love the lottery aspect of it. So anyway, this all ties in with Betr. They have the platform. That they have a pretty solid financing as well. Obviously, the Jake Paul, which is he's a huge, and maybe not my generation. I've never found him, but people a little younger than me love him. He's a big YouTube
Hmm.
celebrity, and that's where a lot of our celebrities are now. Are these internet,
Yeah.
TikTok, YouTube type personalities? So you have all of that. You have again, there is still that, I think, that border to the traditional bets where people are confused, and then and U.S. odds where it's I'm seeing a spread -9.5, -110 aside. What does that mean? I think a lot of people still struggle or are intimidated by that. It takes a bit to learn how to read American odds. This is just much simpler, and they showed the graphic a little bit earlier here, and we still haven't had a great demo of what better looks like. They were I was hoping to find out more, that they were able to do that in a private session to demonstrate what their platform looks like. Oh, you're seeing what that is. Will Aaron Judge hit a home run? It's a much simpler bet, and people can see. Oh, if it's 10 to 1 that he's going to hit a home run, I'll put $1 or $2 on that. So anyway, that's all ties in with the future of it. Very curious to see how this works. They are not going after those big sports books I talked about. They want a very different niche with it. But I think there is potential there. This is again where the industry is headed. It's away from those traditional bets. They want these customized or smaller micro bets. They want people to be able to stack them. And I
Yeah.
think we're going to see more and more of this. And I think there's definitely a room for a better where you have, again, the tech in the background of Joey Levy, who has done this before. You have the publicity and the financing that comes with Jake Paul. So we'll all be curious to see with that too. I think there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah. 100%. And obviously, Better weren't the only company to be kind of grilled by Massachusetts regulators over the last few weeks. I know you've been monitoring that situation closely, and it sounds like they're taking a bit of a different approach to some other states. Are you able to elaborate on that slightly?
Yeah, it's just more so just a more intense approach. It's just really interesting. A part of it is in Massachusetts, everything has to be done publicly. They have very
Hmm.
strong public records laws and meetings and all that, so that we get to see this firsthand, which is part of it. But it's just interesting. MGM, which is basically by their law, more or less guaranteed an online sports betting license by the fact that they have a casino in the state. They got just grilled, and MGM has been preparing for this for years. DraftKings, which is based in Boston and all that. They got to just, drug through everything with it. Very lengthy, in-depth investigation. They've been preparing for this for years. So you kind of understand why maybe a better or a new company that it's just starting out might get, especially with somebody like a Jake Paul who does draw a lot of scrutiny. You can
Yeah.
understand them, but yeah, they just, they're doing their due diligence. They take it very seriously. They're very methodical. They're very intense. Penn National, that took weeks. Now, again, there was a holiday break and there was different sessions and all that, but it took a
Yeah.
very long time. Penn National, again, has a casino in Massachusetts, was basically guaranteed a Penn Entertainment, Barstool Sports license because of the law. And Dave Portnoy, the Barstool founder, there was a lot of jails about that. They had to agree to change the requirements for some of their live shows they do. They can't have anybody under 21. We're seeing this, and Jake, I know you asked about Massachusetts. It's interesting that I think the tide shifts have begun in the U.S., where regulators are feeling more empowered to crack down. Ohio, we saw maybe one of the biggest wave of fines I'd seen in any state right off the bat, and just taking things very seriously about marketing to under 21. And it becomes interesting and difficult for these casinos or excuse me, these sportsbook operators and their parent casino companies. How do you not market to anyone under 21? It can be tough because if you put a TV commercial on, now obviously that one's not as a great example, but there's just certain things they have to look at much more tightly, and these regulators are feeling more empowered. I think we're going to see this. Maybe it's beginning indicative. Trends tend to follow each other in other states. It seems that now companies are feeling more empowered. Excuse me, regulators are feeling more empowered to start cracking down and being more methodical and looking more closely at a lot of these sportsbook companies.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if other states copy that blueprint that Massachusetts is using. Just take a quick pause for breath before we go into our final topic of today. We're absolutely flying through this afternoon, but it's still January, and we still want to hear your predictions for 2023. So, hello to Elizabeth. Thank you for commenting, and to any of our other viewers, keep the predictions coming. Well, yeah, I mean, we'll have to ask Larry David when the cut-off point is for predictions, but I would say the end of January personally. So we've run some more predictions on the website this week as well, this time from Entame's kind of responsible gambling and regulatory affairs expert, Martin Litschke. He's given us some big tips for the US market over the coming year. And I thought it might be a good idea for us to kind of run through these and see which ones we agree with, maybe disagree with. I'm sure Martin will be thrilled with us for doing this live on air. But so his first prediction, we've obviously talked about New York being the biggest state to have legalized online sports betting. He is confident that Texas will basically legislate online sports betting in the next session, which begins on the 10th of January this year. What do you think, Ryan? Is that a long shot?
It is a long shot, very possible. And I'm actually hoping to get over to Austin, Texas, and take a look at people over there with it. It is going to be very difficult to get done. I'm not overly bullish on it. It's possible. Texas's problem is, I think you put it up, they would pass it overwhelmingly. It's just, I don't think it's going to quite get there. I think even in the legislature, I think it has majority support. Republicans and Democrats are two parties. I think it would pass. The problem is that the U.S. political system is not necessarily who or how many votes you have. It's who they are in one spot. So Texas is interesting in a lot of ways. One of them is that their lieutenant governor has a very active role in the legislature. And in most other states, the lieutenant governor is a symbolic post and has very little role. In Texas, it's not. Texas, the lieutenant governor is active. In Texas, the lieutenant governor is named Dan Patrick, and he is a very social conservative. Conservative media a lot, and he does not like gambling very much. And he is not, he is through his role position, is more or less able to stop any form of law he doesn't like at all, including gambling. Now, if he convinced, it's a lot quicker to do, but I just don't know if he is. So we'll be watching along with that. Gambling is not a huge deal in Texas overall. Just a lot of other issues going with it. It's interesting. They only meet in odd numbered years. Most states meet every year. Texas only meets in odd numbered years. So they have a lot to do in a very little bit of time. So maybe there's a double-edged sword to that, where maybe we can get that through because people are feeling alert, but also there are so many other issues to deal with. So I think so. The sports teams are behind it. There's a lot of pressure there. A former governor, Rick Perry, is backing it as well. I think Texans overall, they love to gamble. There's casinos in Oklahoma and Louisiana, two states that border Texas, that are full of Texas plates. I think it's very possible, but I am not as bullish, unfortunately, in Texas, which is a huge deal. It is the second most populated state in the U.S., and it gained more people last year than any other state in America. Gained almost 500,000 people in 1 year, which is about the population of Wyoming. So that's how big a state Texas is, both physically and population-wise, and it would be a huge deal to get that done.
Yeah, definitely. I think, to be fair to Martin, he's probably hopeful rather than bullish. He said it will be an uphill battle. But I think he made a good point in that operators will be hoping if Texas does get it done, there might be this kind of snowball effect where, maybe California is saying, well, if another massive state has managed to do this, then why can't we do it, basically? Really interesting. And hopefully you can get over to Austin for that and cover that on the ground there. His second prediction is an interesting one. Economic pressure will lead to a broader adoption of iGaming in US states. This is probably fairly self-explanatory. States struggling considering the economic headwinds at the moment. will they look to iGaming for additional revenue and state taxes? What do you think?
My twist on that might be we're more likely to look at that maybe next year.
Yeah,
Going into it now, it complicates things. Next year is an election year, so that gets complicated in itself. But these economic headwinds we're seeing, I think where they're coming up. I don't, there's some issues, and I'm not an economist and all that. State legislatures are not feeling a budget crunch today.
yeah,
Now maybe because they're retroactively taking the money they had maybe in the future with it. So it's something to look at it. Again, the biggest problem with iGaming is just, and I understand it is hard for politicians to approve having a slot machine in your pocket. That does, and that's, it's an oversimplification of what regulated online casino gambling is, but that is what it is. And it's just
yeah,
a very tough uphill climb. We're getting better at casino companies embracing it. That was a huge roadblock too for a long time. It's why we don't see it in Nevada, which has every form of gambling imaginable. It doesn't have online casino gaming because a lot of the old school casino owners were
yeah.
afraid that
It would take them off the
it would,
floors potentially.
it would cannibalize and hurt their revenues. The handful of states that have done it, New Jersey, Michigan, Pennsylvania, are the most notable big states that have this. They're seeing the opposite. This is complementing and actually helping encourage in-person casino gambling. It helped save them during the pandemic. It was a huge asset. So we're seeing the opposite play out in these handful of states. So we're getting, fortunately for advocates and for legalization, we are getting rid of that fear from the industry itself. They're now embracing it, but we still have a lot of political fear with it, and I understand. In order to do this, you do have to have a lot of safeguards. It's something to be very aware of. Gambling addiction is a real thing with it, and then also just in every state, we're seeing it with every single state in America that has looked at sports betting, which is an easier political climb. You have lawmakers that just will not support gambling. And then you have a lot of lawmakers that just do not understand the internet. And I'm not exaggerating there. They just do not understand. If you've seen geofencing, if you look at that, the idea of where they're just perplexed and they just do not understand it. In the
Yeah,
U.S., most state lawmakers are part-time. They have other jobs. They are not elected for their gambling expertise. They're elected from their towns or what have you because they
yeah,
are
of course.
representative of a lot of issues. So it is just a very difficult political climb. Budget issues can be one factor. I think that would be more pressing next year than it would be this year.
Yeah,
Just with it. It's something I think we've talked on or looked through it. I might be spoiling it, but there are a handful of states, Indiana being maybe the most notable one of them, that have had more progressive attitudes towards gambling, and those are the kind of states we're looking at. New
yeah,
Jersey has, behind Nevada, New Jersey is the gambling state in the U.S. It is the gambling state of the East Coast. They've always been the most progressive. So you can see why they were able to get that done. Pennsylvania has actually, I have to double check this, but it's almost like they get more of their revenue from gambling tax dollars than even Nevada does. Just
hmm,
because of how they tax and everything with it. It's Pennsylvania has really embraced gambling in part because they're next to New Jersey. So you're seeing these earlier states. Michigan got it done in part through Brant Iden, who is a former lawmaker and is now in the industry through that, and also has been a very progressive gambling state. So the easy ones for there have got it done. It's for every other state in America. It's going to be even those with sports betting, even those with other things with it. One example
yeah,
is Tennessee. Tennessee is a very conservative political state. They were able to get statewide mobile sports betting, in part just because I think people didn't understand it with it, and in part kind of this just capitalist idea with it. But Tennessee has no brick and mortar casinos in the state at all. They're never going to legalize online casino gambling, even though they have online sports betting. I mean, it could be decades before they seriously consider that. So those are the type of things we're running into with slots, digital table games, and all that.
yeah. No, for sure. And Martin's own prediction about iGaming did come with a caveat where he said one of the reasons you gave, Ryan, that a lot of US states are currently flush with cash as a result of being granted all sorts of forms of federal aid off of the back of COVID. So, yeah, that might run out, like you say, and then into next year we see a
Yeah.
few more tailwinds on gaming legislation. But the final prediction, one you've touched on a little bit, is that Indiana will be the first state to regulate iGaming this year. Would you say that's a slam dunk?
No, there is no slam dunk, even in the Hoosier State, which loves its basketball. There are no slam dunks there, but if any state's going to legalize it, is Indiana. That one, I absolutely agree with them on it. They have been looking towards that for a long time. They are a conservative political state, but they have a governor that seems amenable to it. He is not necessarily a social conservative, or a very aggressive social conservative like there are in some other states. We have a state senator Ford, who is a very influential senator, a lawmaker in Indiana, is very active in gaming policy. They were one of the first states to approve sports betting. They have casinos. This is Indiana is shaping up that it could definitely be one of the ones to do it. A little more, just things are, nothing is politically simple in any state. They are a little more politically easier to deal with than some other, New York notoriously, it's just very hard to get anything done. Illinois notoriously, it's just very hard to get anything done. Indiana, they're a little more willing to compromise and get something done with it. So that has been for the whole industry. Indiana has been a big bullseye. That's been our main one. And then you hope that maybe that has a trickle down onto the other states, which we saw with sports betting. You see a domino that states that tend to legalize different forms of gambling, and we've seen this pattern play out and again. It started with the modern lottery in the 1960s, where New Hampshire was the first state to readopt a modern lottery. That led to a kind of domino around New England and then the rest of the East Coast. More and more states adopted the lottery in the 60s. With the tribal casino growth in the 80s, that led to commercial casinos. That started out in the 90s. We saw the same trickle down where when one state legalized it, some of its border neighbors were sick of losing money. They did the same thing. We saw that with, again, the modern integration in sports betting beginning in 2019. Once one state did it, its other neighbors started doing it. And then I think we might see this again with iCasino. So if Indiana can do it, I know that was long-winded, but if Indiana does it right in the heart there, maybe that pushes like in Ohio. Maybe that helps nudge in Illinois. Michigan already has it. So again, just something to look with it. So that's the big thing, the big deal with Indiana. And also, Jake, for predictions, it wouldn't surprise. I mean, I think the over/under should be 1.5 states that legalize online casino gambling in 2023. I just don't think it's, that would be I would put even odds on that happening. If we get a second one, that'd be a big deal. There's no, Iowa, as we discussed, has been a very progressive gambling state. They could be one of those. Illinois is talked about a lot because it is also a very deep gambling state. But again, Illinois is hard to get anything done there. New York's political oxygen, whatever it's going to do for gambling, I think everything is going to be focused on these casinos and just kind of looking at that. I think maybe online casino is more likely in 2024, maybe 2025 after the election cycle is over and people feel more comfortable. It's just going to be very difficult, even for the most likely states. And then a lot of them, even these sports betting states we've seen, they're going to be, there's going to be non-starters and they're not even going to introduce bills. A state like Tennessee, a state like Wyoming, which legalize online sports betting, Massachusetts, we're just not going to see these introduced.
Yeah, exactly. So all eyes on Indiana. I know this is your first pod of the year, Ryan, so I'm going to put you on the spot. Sorry about that. Me and Connor, Kate, live on air gave our predictions last week. I said that gaming companies would be kind of caught up in the crosshairs as regulators clamp down on crypto in general after kind of FTX falling apart and everything else. And Connor, who is not here to defend himself, luckily sort of sat on the fence about Fanatics' US aspirations and whether they were going to make a success of it or not. So I'm going to ask you now live on air for one prediction for the coming year. And you'll be held to account at the end of the year as well. So no pressure.
So I'm going to take a solid one. I think our best bet, I think the number one state I'm looking at for in 2023 is Minnesota legalizes online sports betting. They were close last year.
Nice.
This year, they had a political switch. Last year, they were one of the few states where Republicans and Democrats had different controls of the two chambers. This year, it is both Democrats, the Democratic governor. I think we are going to get that. The biggest difference last year was not so much sports betting, but it was who was going to get it. Republicans wanted to have a more open, competitive market. Democrats were favoring a bill that would just allow states' Native American gaming tribes to be involved in sports betting. Now, with the Republicans out of power in Minnesota with complete Democratic control, this gives them a clear runway to get this tribal-backed gaming bill through both chambers of legislature into the governor's office, who again is also a Democrat. Minnesotans want legal sports betting. They are going to get it done statewide mobile through the tribes. And I think that'll be a slam dunk. We'll be looking at comparatively. We're going to be looking again at Missouri, North Carolina, Georgia, possibly, Texas, a couple other states, but Minnesota is going to be, I'm going to come back, hopefully, Jake, a year from now and tell you Minnesotans will be having a place in sports bets, and I'm confident in that one. That is my bet, or excuse me, my prediction. I am most confident in for 2023.
Good. Okay, they'll be coming after you with their pitchforks and flaming torches. Otherwise, right?
I know they'll be upset. They want it.
Great. All right. Well, that wraps up our topics for today. We've whizzed through it, a nice deep dive on the US market there. And I think we've got some more US products to come, Ryan, including the launch of our Next America podcast. You did the first one yesterday, right?
Yeah, I did it on January 11th. I got that going with it. John Hathis, who is of GeoComply, has been involved in the industry for more than 15 years. Great talk. We talked about Minnesota and why he's also bullish on this as well, but also just the beginning of Ohio sports betting. Talked about New York. We talked about all the other issues there too. So kind of a compliment to this. If anybody enjoyed watching this, please check out our podcast, which we're hoping to drop next week. Probably looks like our target date is the 18th of January. So please come check us out.
Yeah, keep your eyes peeled for that, everybody. It's with our production team at the moment. But thank you so much for joining me and Ryan. We'll be back at the same time next week. And thank you as well, obviously, to our sponsors, Playson and Zimpler. Thanks, everybody. Bye, Ryan.
Thanks, guys.
New York, New York, the city that never sleeps, and the gateway to the land of opportunity. A true melting pot where dreams become reality and great ideas come to life. With the U.S. online sports betting and iGaming sectors predicted to generate $10 billion in 2023, there is so much potential to fulfill. The competition is fierce, and nobody said it would be easy. But together, we can make our sector fly. So get ready to learn, connect, and inspire at iGaming Next, New York City.